you can just see how far they've come, so to speak, with this stuff. Back in the day, they were making a third of global opium or something like that, right on brand for Cold War CIA times. Opium becomes heroin trade, a heroin smuggled through Thailand to Bangkok, sold to Chinese gangsters, makes its way, I think, to Vietnam, right into the veins of the American troops there. And then why the switch to meth? Is it just easier to transport and make, or what? Is heroin less popular now? I don't even really know.
I'll give credit to the principal trafficker in chief of Hua State, is again, same as Wei Shikang. I give him credit as a visionary here. He went all synthetic before any of the Mexican cartels did. He saw the writing on the wall. When you have to rely on a crop like coca or the opium poppy, it kind of sucks. I mean, you have to rely on this army of peasant laborers to produce it. Oh, what if there's a big cold snap and the crop turns out to be not so great? And oh my God, you have to control a lot of land that you can't be growing food on that land. It's kind of a pain. So he realized, and he convinced the Hua government to go along with this, to wholesale shift to methamphetamine for two reasons. One, it was understood that methamphetamine could be a more popular drug in Southeast Asia as heroin was sort of phasing out. And two, if you're primarily producing methamphetamine, which is what the Southeast Asian market wants, you can sell it within Asia. At this point, they did this in the late 90s, early 2000s. So at that point, Southeast Asia had a vibrant enough, working class. They could afford drugs. Back in the day, Vietnam War era, you want to sell narcotics at scale, you have to sell to Americans. I mean, we are the most ravenous consumers of narcotics in the world. We still are. And only Americans and Europeans and others, but only more developed countries could afford to just gobble up a lot of drugs. If you're taking your heroin into the fields and valleys of Southeast Asia, you're going to find a lot of people who grow rice, don't have much money, probably don't even handle that much money. These are not very good consumers of drugs. They can't afford it. That's right. Why it was such a godsend when the United States sent so many GIs into Vietnam. You had these young American guys who had a stipend from the military, and you had a base. They were also very traumatized because they were in a war, and they could afford heroin. So after you got used to selling it to them, then you think, all right, well, we got to sell it to them when they go back home as well. And it wasn't until the early 2000s when Southeast Asia was rich enough to buy its own drugs. And methamphetamine is what they want. You focus on them. And by not selling heroin to the United States anymore, it helps the DEA stay off your back. I mean, the DEA is still going to come after you, but they can't justify a massive, expensive paramilitary style war against your territory.
You mentioned earlier the division in Hua State. Some people wanted drugs and money. Other people, I guess, thought, hey, we're never going to develop further if we can't get assistance and join the legitimate world. So does that division still exist? I know you mentioned there's Christian groups in Hua State, so I assume missionaries got in there at some point if they were Christians, or have they kind of squashed that and now they're all rowing in the same direction?
Yeah, I should probably back up and explain how I would even know about this, because like Jordan, for the past 10 years, I've been trying to peer into the inner circle of Hua leadership. I mean, most of these guys are indicted by the DEA. So it is kind of like trying to get an interview with El Chapo or something like that. It's a mission impossible. It was about 5 years ago when I was becoming friendly with a Hua guy in Myanmar, in a city close to Hua State, a town. And he knew I was trying to interview the leadership. And he had met them. He was pretty high up in the United Hua State Army. And he said, okay, I'm ready to introduce you to my father-in-law. You want to interview a leader? Let's go meet my father-in-law. So who the hell is your father-in-law? It's like, all right, we'll see. So we walk up the street to this compound with security cameras on all the awnings, big cement compound, and we're let inside, go through the gates. we're sitting in this very sort of austere living room, and I look around and I see two things that are really interesting. One is a portrait of Mr. Father-in-law in a WA uniform in his younger days, looking very debonair. I was like, oh, this guy was really high up. I'm used to seeing, like, you think of WA leaders or DEA indicted guys, you think of mugshots, right? But this guy was, The other thing I noticed on the other wall is a portrait of Jesus with, like, blonde Jesus. Pretty
blonde
unusual.
Blonde Jesus or blind Jesus?
I don't know if he could see, but he was definitely blonde.
Okay, that is, I guess, an interesting choice. Okay.
So I said, okay, this guy is Christian, which is unusual for a WA leader because most of them are not just anti-American, but anti-West in general. So in walks a former top 3 leader of WA State. And at this point, he's in his 70s. He flops down. He asks who I am. I tell him, look, I'm American. I also said I was a journalist. I figure this is the part where I get thrown out. But he kind of went,
if you're lucky.
All right, what do you want to know? And the reason he was comfortable with me, I mean, this guy is like, he's like a figure from the Old Testament. He looks you right in the eyes because he's like dark, compelling eyes. He has this kind of sandpapery voice. He's just a very severe person. He had been a top DEA asset. And as I went and continued to visit with him, he eventually revealed this to me. He said that he was one of the most important informants for the DEA in Southeast Asia ever. So I had to check that out. I asked him for the names of his DEA handlers, tracked a few of them down, and they said, oh yeah, that guy's legit. We called him Superstar. That was his code name. So look, being a journalist, I have to check out everyone's story. So I go back to this man. His name is Saulu. And I say, Saulu, just trying to check everything out here. What was your code name? And he goes, oh yeah, Superstar. So this is the guy who is trying to take WA State in a different direction. This is the guy who, because his family was Christianized by missionaries, he believes in America, and he believes America is this great Christian nation that can, like, save his people from the darkness, which is, in his mind, drugs. And so he worked with the DEA to team up, like the DEA teaming up with the drug cartel to have them wind down their operation in exchange for American aid. So he was the principal driver of this movement to unite the WA with the Americans, which is pretty extraordinary.